So that's brilliant stuff. Well done, folks. Guys and girls, we're recording the session. Sometimes we do, sometimes we don't record these because we've got quite a few people today, and a lot of you didn't know about this meeting until a relatively short while ago. There's a high chance there's others who'd like to hear what we're about to be discussing. So I've taken the executive decision that we're recording it. Okay, so this will be circulated. We'll put it on social media. We'll circulate it amongst the Woodford campaign group members, etc., etc. So just be mindful of the fact that anything anybody's going to say is going to be picked up, be that by the media or anywhere else. Okay, I hope that's all okay with everybody. I'm not in my normal place. In fact, I'm in Dublin right now. I'm going to an event, a meeting in the Irish Parliament tomorrow to do with a completely unrelated matter. Believe it or not, something to do with what's called foreclosure fraud. A very, very interesting topic. We've got quite a bit to cover off today. I'm going to kick off by talking about the topic of voting problems. I've seen all kinds of emails from all kinds of people expressing their frustration, that's probably the best word, about problems they've had voting. So topic number one is problems at voting. Please share with me, raise your hand if you'd like to talk about any issues any of you have had or aware of others having in relation to the voting process. We'll only spend a little bit of time on it because it's not exactly an exciting topic, but I do want us to have a record, and this recording is going to help. I do want us to have a record of people who are stating in good faith that they've generally had problems voting. I can see Mr. Chris Walker's put his hand up. Lovely to have you with us, Chris. We'll go to Chris first, and then we'll go to anyone else who wants to talk about voting problems. Chris, thanks. Thank you.
Okay, thanks, Andy. The problem I had was not so much with the voting process itself, it was getting the information out of my broker, particularly. So I suppose that's tangential to what you're trying to raise. The whole process was pretty fraught to start with, but it took 3 weeks before I could get information of my broker. Then uploading it was a bit tricky, but managed to get through that okay. And having submitted this information to Lee Day previously, I have no idea why I had to sort of go through this torturous procedure to sort of upload it again. It could just be transferred straight across.
Thank you very much indeed. We're going to go to Murray Mack. Mr. Murray Mack, please share your thoughts about problems to do with the voting process.
Hello, Andy.
Hi, guys.
Yeah, I found the process very difficult. So my situation, I think we've emailed each other before. I set up 2 junior ISAs. So my son and daughter, they're 4 and 6, I think, when I set these things, or that sort of age. They're now of legal age, so it was all a bit convoluted because they were getting emails and things. I tried to vote against the offer that was made, and I gave up. Basically, I found, similar to the previous person, I found the amount of information required, the form just carried on, and I eventually just gave up. So I didn't think it was an easy process at all. The investments were made through Fidelity, and again, similar to the previous speaker, I'd submitted an awful lot of information already, which I feel should have been moved across, and it should have been made very clear and very easy for people to vote, which, however they were doing it, I thought it was very drawn out.
Right. No, thanks for explaining that. You're reminding me of something Cliff Waite said a while ago. For those of you that don't know Cliff is involved with ShareSoc. They've got their own Facebook group about Woodford, and they've got their campaign group, and they are connected to the Lee Day claim. What Cliff explained to me was there are, and I genuinely didn't know this, and you may all know it, and it may just be me that didn't. There are several companies that specialize in being registrars. And apparently these companies that specialize in being registrars are really, really good and very efficient at handling all kinds of corporate voting type arrangements. I didn't know this. And I remember Cliff saying to me something like, it's really quite weird that they've chosen the particular organisation they chose, I think it was PwC, to handle all the voting, because it's not an area of specialisation of theirs. And the experience a lot of you have had about the voting process makes me think that, has this been, for want of a better phrase, has this been weaponised incompetence? I heard that phrase on the plane over from Southampton to Dublin today. I sat next to a lovely lady who was actually French, but anyway, we got chatting, and she used this phrase, weaponised incompetence. And I said to her, you know what? I'm going to use that phrase. I'm going to nick it off you. Maybe there's a degree of weaponised incompetence in the voting procedures that have been handled. Or maybe I'm just being too cynical. Does anybody else want to come in on this topic of voting problems? Mr. Ian Duffield, please do, sir. Oh, by the way, Ian, if you, sorry. For those of you that don't know, Ian did a superb job in the Telegraph a couple of weeks ago, I think it was, a great article by the Telegraph covering Ian's views on this whole Woodford scandal. I'll try to find a link to it and we'll put it in the chat. Mr. Ian Duffield, tell us about your issues on the voting process, sir. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you for your kind comments, Andy. Yeah, I'm across two platforms, both Hargreaves Lansdown and AJ Bell. For as much I'm unhappy with Hargreaves Lansdown about this issue, because they are embroiled in this, I've found that their communication has generally been very good, and they were very quick out of the blocks in sending around evidence of holding. On the other hand, AJ Bell were very slow, almost as though they didn't know what I was talking about, and I had to really push very hard with communications. Like Chris, it was like pulling teeth, trying to get the information. Eventually I did, but it was very difficult, and I was left with the feeling that if I hadn't have been as knowledgeable on this matter as I was, and how important it was, and kept pushing and pushing and pushing, it took me 3 or 4 secure messages repeatedly to actually get the information from them, and it was very late in coming. So I've seen a disparity between the two different platforms there. Very good for Hargreaves Lansdown, the communication, not reflecting what they've done on this, but AJ Bell, completely the opposite. It was a real struggle.
That was my experience with AJ Bell as well. Yeah.
Yeah, okay. That explains it then, Chris.
Thanks, Ian. Thank you, Chris. Mr. Mark Bishop, you just put a really important note in the chat. Could you elaborate on why this could actually be so significant? Thanks, Mark.
Yeah, so of course, we don't know whether the vote will be for or against the scheme, and we expect to learn the answer on Friday. If it's for the scheme, we've already indicated that we will be doing what we can to challenge its implementation at the sanction hearing on the 18th of January. And at that hearing, we are in a hugely privileged position to have now pro bono legal representation. And I noticed that Hock Chan is on the call. I don't know whether Damon is on it as well. I'll have a look. But I think that they are likely to need evidence. And the things that people are saying now about having difficulties in voting are examples of problems with the scheme, which, if there is a marginal result, could perhaps be useful in arguing that people didn't all have the opportunity to exercise the franchise. Certainly there are other arguments as well, which may prove to be more compelling, but everything we can do to gather information is really useful. So I think it's good that this call is being recorded, and I think we have the contact details, emails of everybody, so we can follow up if we do need, for example, any witness statements or anything of that sort.
Thanks, Mark. Very, very helpful as always. Very helpful as always. I think you all know Mark's a member of the Woodford 10. Ian's a member of the Woodford 10. I think we've got most, if not all. I know we haven't got all, but we've got most of the members of the Woodford 10. And after I've talked about the press release and the letter that was so the press release was sent out today. After I've talked about that, we'll go around the Woodford 10 and invite all of our super duper volunteers to share any additional thoughts they have. Does anybody have anything else on the? Does anybody else have? That was sharing the screen. Does anybody else have anything on the voting issues before we move on? I'll go to what they call gallery view so I can see everybody. Just wave at me if you do. Mr. Neil Taylor, there you are, sir, and Graham Dickinson. Neil, to you, sir. Thank you very much.
Yeah, hi everyone. Yeah, I had similar problems to the other guys, but I think one of the things that bothered me was that when you first pressed the button and logged in, you logged in and did a username password. You got emails back the same time saying, please activate your account, but you could still continue without your account activated. It was a sort of 2 emails from PwC saying your account is activating, but you're allowed to carry on using the document, which was a bit, there's some programming issues there. So that would have confused people as well, I guess, to be honest. But the other thing was that you get a confirmation that you've submitted it, but not a confirmation that it's accepted. And I think that's the big mistake in this. It should be accepted as it's going to be lodged by the chairman. And this is the question I've been talking to Clifford Chance on. Mrs. Jeanette Best, I think her name is. Unfortunately, I call her Janet. She's probably not talking to me anymore, but I think it's Jeanette. Trying to get an answer out of them, and also relayed it to Joe Bannister, who's still sitting on the fence, not answering things properly and giving half an answer to things. So it is worth pursuing this if it's an issue. I think Mark's got a valid point. If it's close, then it would make a difference.
Thank you, Neil. Thank you very much. Mr. Graham Dickinson.
Well, I can echo what Neil said, that I wasn't clear about whether it was mandatory to have an account or not. I was losing the will to live after I entered the password for about the 4th time, and then had to do the whole thing all over again for my wife's account. Other than that, I think filling it in was relatively straightforward, if time consuming. However, although you can kind of take a screenshot to verify that you voted, it's not terribly detailed. And I think I've come to trust Link about as far as I can throw it, which is not very far. The thought occurs to me, how on earth are we going to know whether, firstly, our vote has been counted, and secondly, have they attached the correct value information to it? Who is actually, if anybody, who is vetting the voting process? The information may be out there, in which case I've forgotten, but that thought occurred to me. How will we know? Is there going to be some sort of audit by an independent person of the voting process that will enable us to confirm our vote has been correctly counted?
Graham, you raised some really interesting questions. About 4 or 5 days ago, I think it was, the Woodford 10 sent some questions to Jeanette Best. One of the questions, I think it might have been Alan Pye who came up with it. I actually wrote it, but it wasn't actually my idea. One of the questions was something like, what level of detail will we get on the outcome of the vote? Is it just going to be approved, or sorry, is it just going to be a for or against, or will there be some kind of breakdown? For example, how many block votes there were, how did different cohorts of people vote? Will there be any analysis? And the answer we got back on that was basically, we'll know the outcome, whether it's approved on, sorry, whether it's voted for or against, but they're kind of undecided about whether there may be any subsequent additional detail, which is a bit disappointing. The answer read as if, I'm not saying this is the case, all right, but it read to me as if I hadn't really given that much thought. But the bit that worried me a little bit more was, we asked a question along the lines of, what is the governance and the oversight of the voting regime? And I think the answer we got back was something like, there is a chairman of the voting process in place. But there wasn't much more information beyond that, and I thought there would be. I was expecting this is the formal checks and balances process to make sure everything's transparent and hunky-dory. But the answer didn't seem very full. And that makes me want to refer to an item that's been put in the chat by NB. I don't actually know who NB is, Is MB willing to elaborate on the point that he or she has put in the chat? I'll read out what MB wrote. MB wrote, "The end result of the vote is not full and final. You are able to edit your vote even after voting, which means in the world of IT that the actual vote could be modified by an administrator ? So NB isn't suggesting, and I'm not suggesting for a moment, that anybody would do such a thing. But NB does make a rather interesting point. NB, if you're happy to talk about that point, please take yourself off mute and do so. It may
Yeah, can you hear me, Andy?
I can, yeah. Please introduce yourself, NB. Please notes.
Yeah. Hi, I'm Nick Bremner. I've sent you the odd email actually, Andy, and you've always responded, which I can't quite believe given your workload. Yeah, I used to work for PwC, and there used to be a company which was involved in IT and audit, and now they've moved into an area where they solicit infrastructure for voting purposes, not just for this kind of thing. And yeah, you can vote without an account, because I saw that. The other thing was, by the time you've got to the end of the very convoluted form, and you've figured out who you are in relation to the different groups, you can vote. You can close it down. You can come back into your account, and you can change your vote. I can promise you, if I can do it, an administrator can do that, because it's not we talk about blockchain, that's a closed loop process within IT, which is unmodifiable and anonymous. This appears to be an open-ended process on some very basic IT infrastructure. So, and that's all I can say on the subject. It didn't give me confidence that somebody anonymously could actually go, I'm going to check this other box.
Well, sir, I think you might have raised a really important point. I've got no idea if it is important, but it feels to me that if there isn't confidence in the integrity of the voting process, then that's pretty damn problematic. And surely, if you're going to do a vote, if you're going to manage a vote for loads of people to do their life savings, you'd make sure the system was pretty solid, wouldn't you? Thank you so much for raising that. I'm bloody glad I'm very glad we're recording this. I think Mark's point earlier about sharing this with the court might be really useful. Mr. Peter Glass, your turn, and then we'll move on to the letter that was superbly written by Mr. Damien Falkowski. Peter, your thoughts?
Yeah, thanks, Andy. I suppose, why should we be surprised by what we're talking about right now? Because it's just the latest chapter in a whole litany of events where smoke and mirrors is probably being quite generous. And I think fundamentally the integrity of the process, if it is as people's experiences currently and as described, is potentially fundamentally flawed. And I think that interesting reading the email that came out earlier, and particularly with Damien's input. I just wonder, if this is another thing in the round that should get raised. So yeah, I think it just confirms more and more what a lot of us have been thinking for quite a while. And I guess after the vote's taken and the results known, then that will that will enlighten or invigor the conversation even further. But we'll have to wait and see about that one. So thanks, Andy.
Thank you, Peter. Thank you very much indeed. Folks, I'm going to spend the next roughly 10 minutes or so talking about what's happened in the last 24 hours or so regarding the letter from Damien Falkowski. But before I do that, I'm going to share with you a little pet theory of life that I've got. And I call this my stinging nettles theory. And you'll see where I'm going with this eventually, so just bear with me, folks, okay? This is the Andy Agathangelo stinging nettles theory. When I went to school, in primary school, there was loads of stinging nettles in the, where we all went to play And I was always falling into them, always. I just kept falling into stinging nettles. And there would always be dock leaves. Do you remember when you were a kid? If you fell in stinging nettles, normally within like 5 feet or whatever, there'd be some dock leaves. And you grabbed the dock leaf and you rubbed your knee or whatever it was that's got stinging nettles all over it. And within a few moments, the lotion or whatever it is that's inside dock leaves would take the sting away. And I've always thought about that, about how weird it is that when you kind of need something, it just kind of sometimes in life, it doesn't always, but sometimes in life, it just kind of appears. So there we were, me and Mark Bishop at the court hearing on the 12th of October, talking to this room full of lawyers and learned people, doing the best we possibly could to speak up for the investors. And we did as best as we could. And later on, Mark and I said to each other, actually it was Mark's idea. Mark said, you know what, it would be brilliant if we could somehow find a lawyer to help us. And to cut this story short, one conversation led to another conversation that led to another conversation that led to a conversation with Damien Falkowski. And my goodness me, talk about a dock leaf popping up just when we needed one. So I'm going to share my screen, folks. I really want you all to understand how lucky we all are. I mean this literally, how lucky we all are that Barrister Damien Falkowski has agreed to help us on a purely pro bono basis. There isn't any commission thing here. There isn't any kind of, I'll do this if you do that. We're talking here about a principled professional who wants to help. And he's a really impressive man. He's a really impressive man. He's a proper actual barrister, 25 years experience, with one hell of a brain and mind. And he works with somebody who I'm not going to spend too much time talking about for one reason or another. He works with somebody who we've really got to know very, very well in TTF land over the last couple of years. And between the two of them, in all honesty, we are so lucky to have the input. And to cut this long story short, Mark's idea of maybe we can find a lawyer to help us resulted in the conversations that resulted in Damien Falkowski sending a beautifully elegant letter to the investor advocate that basically says, in plain kind of English, it basically says, dear investor advocate, have you, the FCA link, actually considered whether the Financial Services and Markets Act and the Financial Ombudsman Service and the FSCS can be lawfully overridden, cast aside, blown away by your scheme of arrangement? You know, does your scheme of arrangement that is basically built in the land of company law to do with insolvencies and turning companies around, do you actually think that that company law stuff is more kind of powerful? These are my words, not his. He's a proper barrister. More powerful than the Financial Services and Markets Act that basically created the Financial Ombudsman Service and the FSCS, the Financial Services Compensation Scheme, as inviolable parts, undefeatable parts of the regulatory framework, a regulatory framework that's basically designed to give all of us confidence that if we invest in a company that collapses, there will be protections in place. What a remarkable letter. I'll put it in the chat because some of you may not have had a chance to read it yet. We don't know what's going to happen, but it sounds to me like a rather good point to raise with the investor advocate. And who knows? And isn't it remarkable that this line of thought hasn't previously come up despite all the lawyers who've been involved in this whole Woodford scandal? So I'll put the letter that Damien Falkowski put to the Investor Advocate. I'll put that in the chat. I'll put the TGF press release that we circulated this morning to some of our media contacts in the chat as well. Have a read. But can I please invite everybody to do something? You know, we have the Woodford 10. Well as the Woodford 10, we've now got the Isle of Man 2 because Damien, the barrister, and his colleague are in the Isle of Man. And could I please invite everybody to take a moment to stop and think that here we've got a couple of seriously competent legal professionals giving us help with no strings attached and no, I'll do this if you do that, just because they want to help, because they actually are genuinely concerned about the way the trust and confidence and the integrity of the investment landscape is being attacked by what the FCA and Link and the others are doing. Could I please invite you to join me in applauding, quite literally applauding the work of Damien and his colleague, and for stepping forward in the way that they have, and for being the dock leaf that we will have wished for when we fell in the stinging nettles as a consequence of the scheme of arrangement. Damien, your colleague, we salute you. We applaud you. Thank you very, very much for doing what you're doing. It's massively appreciated, and it gives me, and I'm sure others, hope. Mr. Ian Duffield, you put your hand up earlier. Please share your thought. Thank you.
Yeah, this is just an item I've seen in the chat. It's come from a Susan, S.I. And what Susan says, which is really disturbing, unless there's something peculiar about her pension, the Quilter platform had the vote, not her. I have two self-invested pensions, two SIPs, as I said earlier, one with Hargreaves Lansdown, one with AJ Bell. I did have to explain to AJ Bell, that I was the investor here with the vote. And when that eventually sank in, then I did get my evidence of holding. Hargreaves Lansdown knew the situation. They sent it straight off. But if this has happened to Susan, unless there's something I don't understand about her pension being on the Quilter platform, how many more individual investors have been denied the vote because their platform, whoever they used, didn't understand what was going on here? And should that not have been fundamentally explained? Yes, I do know there was an explanation and it was made, I won't say clear, but it was in the scheme of arrangement as to who had the vote. That document was so complicated that another issue here is the plain language, which is an obligation under the Unfair Contract Terms Act for consumers to have contracts in plain language, that they did not understand that they had the vote. And disturbingly enough, institutions that should have known what the situation was, namely the platforms, they didn't seem to get it either. This could be a far, far widespread issue, that individual investors did not get that vote. If it's happened to Susan, how many others has it happened to?
Mr. Duffield, once again, you raise really important points. I'll tell you what, I really wouldn't want to be the person responsible for all this, because the consequences of getting stuff wrong is pretty heavy duty. I really would not want to be the person responsible for this scheme of arrangement or for promoting it. Communication has been absolutely key. Just speaking very openly, the Transparency Task Force, my organisation, we have formally come to the view that the communications from the FCA and from Link have been misleading. And I'm here and now, this has been recorded. I think the misleading hasn't been accidental. I think that they've deliberately attempted to, I don't know, confuse, deceive. And I'll tell you what kind of was the straw that broke the camel's back, so to speak, in terms of my trust and confidence in the communications, was when Damon Parker from Harkers Parker, the law firm, explained to us that the scheme of arrangement actually stops people suing Hargreaves Lansdown. And you've got, honestly, you've got to be like a proper student or expert of the law to read that scheme of arrangement and come to the conclusion that's what it means. So if even some lawyers haven't understood that, because we have reason to believe that's the case, if even some lawyers haven't understood that, then listening to Ian Duffield just now talk about the importance of plain communication for consumers and the Consumer Protection Act and all that stuff, it's absolutely atrocious. It's absolutely atrocious. We're going to go around the Woodford 10 and invite each of the Woodford 10 who's here. I think we've got 6 or 7 of them here to share anything they want to share. And we'll go to Mr. Mark Bishop first of all, please. Mark Bishop, thank you. Then we'll go to Graham Dickinson. Then we'll go to Ian Duffield. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. I mean, firstly, I want to thank the Isle of Man too for everything that they're doing and undertaking to do. I think that their involvement is transformative because really it solves the problem that otherwise existed. There's a good Australian academic who specialises in financial services regulation issues and is associated with the Transparency Task Force called Dr. Andy Smulo. You can Google him. And he talks about the poverty of the commons, by which he means if there's a large number of people who've been wronged by an institution, it's often very difficult for them to raise money to fight against that party because they don't have a kind of common entity through which they can do it. And you get a free rider problem if some people contribute and others don't, and therefore the sum tends not to want to contribute. So this kind of pro bono is really the only realistic way we could see of getting this going, particularly at very short notice. I think that there is some cynicism. I noticed one person in the chat. I do understand your concerns. Will we succeed in overturning the vote if it is for the scheme? Well, we understand that the barriers are fairly high, but we also have plenty of evidence. And that evidence really is partly about the information that has been given and withheld. Some of the information is very partial, and some useful information has not been provided. There is also the procedural flaws, and there is also, I think, probably one of the big issues for me is the block vote exercised by Hargreaves Lansdown Fund Management, where it should be voting for the underlying investors' interests, but it may well vote in the interest of Hargreaves Lansdown itself, because that, for very obvious reasons, will not want to ruffle the feathers of the FCA, and will very much want to get this issue dealt with, particularly in a way that the scheme does, which is to rule out what's known as contribution claims, which means that any claim to which Link could be a contributor, even if it's not the party being sued, is effectively already dealt with by the scheme. Therefore, it would be reckless to sue, for example, Hargreaves Lansdown, because they would say it's not our fault, or it's only partly our fault. It's Link that should have prevented this from happening. And the minute they're joined, not only are you not going to get compensation, but also if you lose, you're going to owe Link its legal fees. So it is quite a flawed scheme. There is a lot of flawed communication, and we also now know flawed voting process. So we have to collate as much evidence as we can if, as we fear, the vote goes in favour of the scheme on Friday.
Mark, thank you very much. I know you're not a betting man, Mark, but what's your hunch? What's likely, do you think, to be the outcome of the vote, and why?
So, as many people here know, but for those who don't, there are effectively there's only one voting process, but there are 2 calculations of the vote. The first one is that 75% by value of the votes cast must be in favour of the scheme, and the second one is that the majority by number of the votes cast must be the scheme. Hargreaves Lansdown Fund Management owns 14.36% of the votes and has indicated that it will vote. Do I believe that more than 14.36% of the other voters will vote by value? Probably not, quite possibly not. So I think that there is a very high probability that the 75% threshold will be met. In fact, I'd probably bet the house on it. The second one, the 50% by volume, I think will be tighter. And what I've noticed is there was a poll done by our friends at ShareSoc, and they showed that the majority of their members would vote against the scheme. A higher proportion of ours would vote against the scheme. But as Cliffwaite put it, that's because you've done more stuff about it, which kind of implies actually the more you hear about the scheme, the more likely you are to be against it. What we must remember is there's a very large number of people who are not directly involved in this issue. people who at the most will get the emails, from their platform saying, there is a message for you, and they'll go and look at it. And those people who are not engaged with anything, they will only read what they're shown. And what they're shown says, the FCA thinks this is a great scheme. The investor advocate and the investor committee both think it's a great scheme. They don't tell you that those parties have all got a horse in this race and a reason to be wanting you to vote a particular way. But if you simply read the scheme documentation, I think you'd have to be barking, frankly, to vote against the scheme. So I think there's a large number of people who are detached from the issues who will vote for the scheme. Whether that will get over the 50-50, the volume votes thing over the line, I don't know. My guess is it will, but I can't be sure.
Mark, thank you very much indeed, sir. Thank you very, very much indeed. All the Woodford 10 have been working hard behind the scenes, doing the stuff on a purely voluntary basis to try to do what they can to make a difference. And it's been an absolute pleasure to be part of the Woodford 10. It really has. And before it was the Woodford 10, it was the Woodford 9, and before that it was the Woodford 8, etc., etc., etc. It's just grown very naturally and very organically, and the vibe amongst the group is just wonderful. We're going to go to Mr. Graham Dickinson next, and then to Mr. Ian Duffield, and then we'll go to Neil Taylor. Graham, anything you'd like to share today?
Yes, a couple of things. I'll try and make it fairly brief. As for the others, many thanks to Damien and his colleague for coming in to help here. I've seen some stuff in their work that really chimes with me. The first thing in that letter was about the insolvency element. As a chartered surveyor with some experience in legal matters and insolvency, when I read all the scheme documents, it read to me, this is an insolvency. It's a scheme of arrangement, which is an insolvency methodology. The company is going to give all of its remaining assets to this claim and go out of business. It's an orderly, arranged by agreement insolvency, but it's an insolvency. And as such, I couldn't understand why FCA and others have been maintaining that because the company hasn't failed, it can't go to the FSCS scheme. And I think Damien's letter is picking up on that point. He's quite clearly saying, yes, this is an insolvency. It is a company failure. And I'm glad to see that being argued properly here. The other element in the letter relates to statutory rights, which we've touched on today. Again, in my former professional life, it's been my experience very consistently that you cannot contract out of statutory rights. And that's exactly what's happening here. There are certain limited contexts where you can do that, and there may be some methodology to decide what conflicting statute might prevail over another that I don't know about. But it seems to me that the scheme of arrangement is a commercial transaction, and it's being signed on our behalf by Link, and we will be contracting out of our statutory rights to go to the Ombudsman or to the FSCS. A couple of other points. I mentioned earlier my worries over the vote verification. After I finished the voting process, of course, if you want to attend the meeting virtually, you then have to phone to ask for an invitation. I duly got some Herbert at a call centre that didn't seem to know much what I was talking about. And so I said to him, can you please email me as soon as we finish this conversation and confirm that I have an invitation to the meeting on its way. Needless to say, nothing's arrived. I still don't have an invitation, but the meeting is quite imminent now. Has anybody else had an invitation? I certainly haven't, and I'll be chasing very hard tomorrow. So I think that's it for me. That covers the points I had to make.
Graham, thank you very much indeed, and thank you again for stepping forward to be part of the team. Your calm, measured, incisive way of looking at things has really helped. Has really helped. Mr. Ian Duffield, we'll go to Ian, then we'll go to Neil Taylor, then we'll go to Will Durston, I think. Yeah, we will. Ian, anything else?
Yeah, it's a couple of things. Very much on the grounds of what Neil's spoken about. In my previous work, I had to and did develop a really good understanding of basically consumer rights and terms and conditions, which is the way I've looked at this. I've read Damien's draft submissions, which I found very, very interesting. Damien has concentrated on the various financial acts, which I'm not familiar with because I was working for a retail organisation in my capacity, but also was doing contract work. So I have a reasonable understanding of contract legality. In respect to what Neil said, absolutely, LFSL are an insolvent company, and my understanding of insolvency law, although not detailed, is that you become insolvent the minute you cannot meet your legal requirements, regardless of what you do about it. So it's not about when any legal action is taken or somebody winds you up, it's the minute you can't meet your debts. And that's obviously been the case for some time. The thrust of Damien's submissions were very much along the consumer angle. And it's something that I think easily gets overlooked in the financial world because it's a complicated area. Investing puts a lot of people off. And for that reason, everything really does need to be in plain language because you're not only talking now about lawyers and legal contracts, you're also talking about financial and accountancy principles. And two areas that frighten most consumers off are accountancy and finance. So the issue around communications being in very, very clear, easy, simple to understand language for consumers to me is critical. And again, I concur with Neil. A general legal principle in English law is you cannot exclude a consumer's statutory rights. It's very clear in consumer protection, but finance doesn't get regarded as that. But this is what it is. We are consumers here, most of us, if not all of us. And therefore, the way that this scheme of arrangement stampedes across consumers' rights is absolutely staggering. It's written so it's incomprehensible to even some professionals, but certainly even intelligent people. So, people are, sorry, that sounds patronising, people who you'd regard as being knowledgeable in these areas. But there's a significant number of consumers here who have invested pension money, have invested life savings, who are just going to get trampled on and have even no idea that they're being trampled on. And that's my great concern. There's a few other principles here. And when you look at contract law in general, and certainly the Unfair Contract Terms Act, the bargaining power of the two parties needs to be taken into account. And there's lots of legislation come up in the past, such as on payment terms, where if you are a huge organisation versus a small organisation when negotiating a contract, that comes into play as well. And here we have a company with a huge amount of money, LFSL, being backed by a government body, the FCA, supporting it, saying, we'll tell you what's good for you, not what actually your statutory rights you have that should allow you to argue against this thing. And that's the disgraceful thing about this. So this is, not only has it become a financial, and I'm going to use the word, I don't know what to use the word corrupt, certainly incompetent financial organisation going right back to Woodford management and all the way through LFSL and all the other organisations involved with this who have a huge amount of money. These things have gone on before by the same people time and time and time again, and they still get to walk away with it. And it's just absolutely incredible that we now have a government body, the FCA, whose brief is to look after and protect consumers, not organisations, consumers. That's us. And they are backing a move by organisations who have committed all sorts of misconduct in the past, and they're doing it again and just get to walk away time and time again. And to me, we should be crying out as consumers. I'm actually amazed that this hasn't made things like the news at 10, which I saw the other day, we're being interviewed a couple of weeks ago because a bank had problems with its IT system and credit cards weren't getting processed. And that's in the news.
Yeah.
Yet here we're talking billions of pounds where consumers have been treated absolutely disgracefully, and we're having to fight to get it into the media. I'm surprised this thing hasn't been all over the news, what is going on with the scheme arrangement. Yes, I know there was a big flurry when the Woodford scandal first happened, but there's been very little focus on the scheme of arrangement, and this really is the death blow. This is the stab in the back that's happening here now after what's happened. And I'm sorry if that people think I get a bit manic about this. I'm very passionate about this for obvious reasons because of the money, but also the way people have just been trampled over. I just want to really strongly make those points.
You've made them strongly, and you've made them really, really well. And I'll tell you what, you've made me think about something I've never thought of. My hunch, Mark will tell me if I've got this wrong, my hunch is that at least 2/3 of the media coverage in the last 6 months about Woodford is somehow stuff to do with things we've been involved with. My point is, and this is not some kind of aren't we lovely kind of message, it really isn't. My point is, had we not been doing what we were doing, there's probably would have been virtually nothing about Woodford in the last 6 months. That's actually quite scary. Ian, you made a really interesting point. We're going to go now to Mr. Neil Taylor, then to Marty Fairmont. Neil. You might be on mute, Neil.
Yeah, okay.
Thank you.
Yeah, I tend to agree with exactly what Graham said, and I have sympathy with Ian as well, because I think it has been contrived, this scheme of arrangement between two parties. Doesn't belong to League Fund Solutions. It belongs to the FCA as well, and they've worked together in the 6 months they've had time and issued this and fixed it so it dodges the bullets that they don't want to be fired at. You know, the FSCS and the FOS, and any claims against those pots of gold can't be done. And it would be interesting to see what the response is to Damien Fokalski's letter to Joe Bannister and also to Clifford Chance. I guess Clifford Chance will have to answer this one. This is beyond Joe's remit, I guess, answering that one. But it'd be interesting to know that. And I think it's good that it's issued nice and early. So it's not issued as an afterthought. It's a good idea that that's out there now. And I just wanted to think, I think it'd be quite useful to bring this to the attention of the other legal firms as well. I think that's a good idea. I think Damon Parker and Lee Day and RGL should also have this piece of ammunition as well, and try and support this, because the more the support is from their membership, the bigger the message you're making. If we can get that done, I think that will be really powerful if the vote goes through. And I think that's where we need to get the power and the strength in numbers, you know. So I think it is a real credit to the two guys that have done this rather elegant. The word is elegant because it's so straightforward thinking, you know, it's just pure and unadulterated thinking about this business being insolvent. It is insolvent. It's getting out of it because the FCA have lowered the targets from 298 million or 306 million down to a figure where they can just about squeeze it out of the business and dodge it by a few pennies. You know, they're dodging an insolvency by a few pennies. Technically, the business is gone now. It's disappeared already. It's not there. It's a shell at the moment. So you could say that suing it seems pretty pointless, but it obviously has cash. It has quite a bit of cash at the moment, but it still needs pursuing to the end, because there's, like you say, it's 2.8 billion pounds of investors have lost money, and the 230 million that people are going to get is really a drop in the ocean to what they've lost. This is such a significant case, but we need the openness of the FCA, the report done, the understanding of why it's so grossly underinsured, what was their actions involved in these decision-making processes about why hasn't the FSCS done a determination. All of these things are very making it vague, so people are going to support it. Or this is the intention, is to get people to support something which is not in their interest. And as Mark Bishop has said, there's so many people who've got relatively small amounts in there, and they'll probably just accept what people say. And I'm hoping that the vote count goes the same way as Mark suggests, that on the count, not the value, but the count, it will follow the lines that we've got within the group, which is about 82% of people voting no. And that will be fantastic, if that happens.
Neil, thank you very, very much indeed. Thank you very, very much indeed. Mr. Marty Faramond, and I think Marty might be the last one of the Woodford 10 who's here today. Marty, thank you.
Thank you, Andy. Yeah, look, where my mind is on this at the moment is, I guess every time I think about this whole situation, my head just kind of fills and explodes with all the different aspects of this that we're kind of talking about here, and the issues that we have with the whole scheme of arrangement and how the vote's been managed, and just the kind of the unjustness of it all. And hopefully we'll be surprised and we get it voted, gets voted down, and we'll all be having a nice drink on Friday evening to celebrate. But assuming that's not the case, we don't have very long to turn around thinking on to the sanctioning hearing that takes place in January. If my understanding of the process after the vote is correct, we have basically until the end of next week to put in writing any objections we have to the investor advocate and or the court. So I don't think we can just rock up to court in January with objections without having put them in writing first, is my understanding. Yeah. So we've got a week on Friday. I know we're meeting on Friday, but I think very quickly we need to, obviously we're going to have lawyers putting our case forward there, but I certainly would like to have my say at that hearing, either virtually or in person. And I guess very quickly, the judge is not going to let us just rabbit on for hours, each of us basically making the same points over and over again. So I guess working with the lawyers and working between the Woodford 10 and anyone else basically is developing these different themes that we have into something that we can put to the judge in hope that she or he kind of sees, all the flaws that exist with this whole scheme of arrangement. So that's where my thinking is. I guess it's a conversation for us to have on Friday, depending on where the vote has gone. But we won't have very long. It's a week, is my understanding. We don't have till January to develop all this stuff.
I think that's exactly
my thoughts.
Marty, thank you very much indeed. Forgive me, I didn't mean to speak over you just then. It was a bit of a delay, and I think you're right. The Isle of Man 2 have basically said we need to absolutely get something in writing to the court to kind of register the issues that need to be raised. Thanks, Marty. And next we'll go to Will. Will, forgive me, I did remember you before, but then I forgot that I'd remembered you, you know what I mean? Will, anything else from yourself? Thank you.
Thanks, Andy. Not much to add, actually. So many wise words this evening. All I would say, coming back to the vote, and maybe we take this away as the Woodford 10, I do feel we need to kick off some sort of formal audit. I don't know whether we'll even get the opportunity to get access to the materials, but I'm so impressed with the legal help we've got on board with the Isle of Man 2. If we can find some similar audit expertise, and maybe there's someone on this call who has that expertise who might be willing to lend it to us. Because Ian's point around the fact that the same shares could be voting twice against each other, one from the owner of the shares and the second in a block vote with the platform or the SIP entity voting in a different direction. If we can demonstrate the same shares have been used to vote twice, I think we can declare the voting process null and void. John Oldfield in the comments made great comment. If there's no oversight of the vote, then the ballot box could be suitably stuffed. So I just say, Andy, we try and kick off some sort of formal voting audit process if we can.
What a cracking idea. Could you do me a favour, Will? Could you send me like one sentence, just say, Andy to ask Cliff Waite who he knows in the registrar space, who might have a buddy in the audit space, who might want to kick up about the fact that a non-registrar firm did the voting stuff. If you whack me that sentence, that would be good. Folks, we're going to come to a close very, very shortly. We're going to come to a close shortly. I just wanted to show you a couple of things. So share screen. After I've shared my screen, we're going to go to Mr. Hock Chan, who's one of the Guildford, sorry, Guildford, I said the Guildford 4 then, one of the Isle of Man 2. What you're looking at here is the agenda we got out of the Clifford Chance crew for the session tomorrow. And you'll see that there's a bit in there about questions and comments, okay? So please, please, please do try to attend the session tomorrow, even if it's just to ask questions and make comments. That's really important. And secondly, please make sure you look at this week's Transparency Times to book yourselves onto the session we've got on Friday at 3:30. And you'll see the notes in the Transparency Times where we say we think the 3:30 session is going to finish at 4:30. It may need to go beyond that if we haven't by then got the vote result. So it's all going to be a bit kind of squishy because we don't know what's going to happen. I'm very, very, very pleased to say, folks, that Mr. Hock Chan has raised his hand. Folks, Mr. Hock Chan is one half of the Isle of Man 2. Can you please do what's going to come naturally to you to thank Mr. Hock Chan for being one half of the Isle of Man 2? Hock, thank you very much indeed. Thank you.
No, you're welcome, Andy. First of all, I can just say to everyone involved, I'm not a victim of the fund, but I do feel for all of you and the situations that each of you found yourselves in. I don't think what Damien and I are able to do will directly get you your money back. So I don't think we can promise that. But what we can do is give you some legal, although I'm not practicing anymore and I don't give formal advice, we can give you some legal guidance of where to go and to help Andy bring you guys along on the journey. Because I've told Andy already, this is going to be a 3-movie franchise to get you to the end where you guys will cash your checks. So, we've only just in legal terms got past the opening credits of Star Wars, and we've not yet seen the Death Star, let alone blown it up. But what we found during, Andy and I go back and we could talk for ages about what we personally think from our experiences of interacting with the FCA and its attitude towards consumers and consumer rights. That actually isn't what we're doing today, and that's not what we're focused on, because that is not going to stop the scheme of arrangement. What we have identified is a fundamental rule of law, which I am hoping that if we are right and geniuses, we'll go to the Supreme Court, leapfrogging the Court of Appeal, to establish the principle that these fundamental FSMA enacted protections cannot be derogated from by an insolvency procedure, let alone one approved by and promoted by the Financial Conduct Authority. That is a fundamental principle of law. And if you can understand that as a result of that principle of law, it means if we are right, then there is no power that the judge will have in January to approve the scheme. It just doesn't arrive. So she can't say, on the balance of the benefits and the burden, I'm going to make this decision. It just says she's unable to make the decision and the scheme automatically fails. It's only if we lose that argument, and if we lose that argument in law, that's where we go to the Supreme Court. She then has the power to exercise her discretion. And it's at that point all these other arguments that you have been discussing today about whether the votes were properly counted, whether the system was right, whether you've got the right numbers, etc. That's where these start coming in, and that is a fight for another day. But I think what you need to do, Andy, is, if you can, rally the troops, collect the evidence and the points, because there will be a limited amount that we can do in the week or so that we have left. And what we want to do is fire the main point first and see what the indigestion appears to be. Yeah. And so far, in a day or so, we've not had the usual letter back from the mega law firm telling us that we've fundamentally evinced a fundamental misunderstanding, I think I was told last time round by the mega law firm, of the law, and i.e. I'm an idiot. So we're dumb and dumber over here in the Isle of Man, just waiting to be told by the mega firms. But that's all I want to achieve at this point, and that is attack the scheme of arrangement. And then everyone needs to rally around Andy and get into the politics of this, because that's where I think movie 2 and movie 3 are going to be, and that's the fight. Thank you.
Hock, thank you so much. I'm going to ask everyone to do it again. All right, you can tell folks we're talking about highly capable, highly competent legal professionals, whether retired or otherwise. Can I once again please invite you to show your appreciation to the Isle of Man too? Thank you, thank you. I'm late for my 5 o'clock Zoom meeting with a guy called Tim. Now, if Tim is in the room, so to speak, please let me know, because otherwise I'll let things roll on a little bit. If Tim's in the room, let me know. Meanwhile, let's go to Mr. Ian Duffield, who raised his hand again. Thank you, Ian.
Andy, thank you. Can you hear me?
Oh, yeah, sorry. We can.
Yeah, okay. Yeah. This is actually a question that I'd really love Hock to respond to if you can. Hock, I did send you an email a little bit earlier. It's what I previously sent to the Woodford 10, looking specifically at the Unfair Contract Terms Act and this very crucial issue of consumer rights and what is fundamentally a principle of law that cannot be overridden. And to me, a key element of this was that if this scheme gets approved and somebody then took action against the third parties who had been indemnified under what I see to be a clause that is unlawful under the Unfair Contract Terms Act 1977, which is about third-party indemnities relating to consumers and consumers not being lawfully bound by that, whether or not then any third party attempting to defend subsequent litigation on the grounds that the scheme of arrangement had been approved could use the indemnity in that to say, well, there's an indemnity here, so we can use that as a defence. And if so, my feelings are that any such defence should be struck out. Do you have a view on that, Hock, or what are your thoughts on that?
At this moment in time, that's not been our focus over the last weekend. We put together that everything that you've seen as our work product started pretty much Friday evening and popped out live on Monday. So the issue that you've raised, Ian, isn't something that we've looked at in any detail. However, if I can just say as a preliminary issue, you're describing issues which would normally arise under a contract with consumers, which is governed by UCTA. Now, it's a long time since I've done any UCTA stuff, but however, what we're looking at here is a scheme of arrangement with associated documents, which is before the court for the court's approval. So once you have a court approval, those are the documents, they're legally valid in the ordinary course on their face. Other parties, the lawyers and other people looking at these things later on will simply look at the four corners of the document, look at the court's stamp on the order approving it, and go, okay, that's now binding because there's an order of the court to do that. So if you were to run those UCTA type arguments, I think they would have some difficulty, because if I were on the other side and calling you dumb and dumber from the big firm, that is the starting point that I would use.
Understood. Okay, that's great. From a personal point, thank you very, very much for your involvement, and also in respect of Damien. Thank you.
Well, nice one, Ian. Thanks, Hock. Folks, I'll bring things to a close in just a few moments. And by the way, what Hock just said is literally true. All right. What happened, what was sent out yesterday essentially started on Friday night. Isn't that bleeding amazing? Honestly, isn't it just incredible? Talk about where there's a will, there's a way. I'm going to share my screen because you might be interested in this. What you're looking at is the video testimony of somebody called Alan Campbell. You're now thinking, who on earth is Alan Campbell? Alan Campbell, somebody who runs Debt Hacker, which is basically a charity to help people who are borrowing money. And to cut a very, very long story short, I encourage you to watch the interview with Alan Campbell and read the submission. Can you see the Alan Campbell testimony underneath it? Because Hock was very, 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 very involved in that. That's how we got to know Hock. And this web page, you won't recognize it, I don't think. It's the web page of testimony from about 20 or so people to do with something called the All-Party Parliamentary Group on Personal Banking and Fairer Financial Services call for evidence about the Financial Conduct Authority. I'll put a note about this in the chat because I encourage you to watch the Alan Campbell video and read the Alan Campbell testimony and pay particular attention to the bit when Alan Campbell is explaining how we discovered that the FCA has a policy position to not carry out routine checks on what regulated entities do. I'm going to write a note in the chat. Does anybody have anything else they're itching to say before we wrap up?
Andy, can I just explain to the guys on the, if I may?
Please do. Please do. I mean, of course.
My mate Alan and I kind of describe it as he's Elton, he sings the song, and I'm Bernie, and I write the lyrics. Yeah. And that was a shocking example, as Andy has said, where we had the director of retail lending at the FCA writing back to us and saying, as a matter of general supervisory approach, we do not check the APRs being offered by our licensed lenders. We give them a license, we give them a copy of the rule book, and we expect them to abide by them and run their businesses in accordance with the principles. Thank you very much. Move on. And that is where we ended up. And during lockdown and shortly afterwards, we were successful in taking down this payday lender that we were after, which was a high cost lender. It wasn't technically a payday lender, but behaved like one. and that had 150,000 victims every year. Borrowing money at apparently 68.7% APR, but really at 1,200%. And 30% of these people exited the arrangements with non-payment markers against their credit histories. And we reckon about 61% of them took home between 10 and 20,000 pounds a year. That was the scale of the harm. And at that point, if I can roll back to your position, it was Alan and me bringing it to the party, but it was Andy and TTF and galvanizing the political support which got this over the line. And this is where I think where you guys need to be. I might be there quietly as a, as dumber or dumber in the background, helping write a few lyrics for you. But you're going to have to sing the song, guys, all of you, and motivate the press, motivate the MPs, get your message across. That's how you get your money back.
Thanks, Hock. So much. By complete coincidence, on the plane over to Dublin today, I sat next to a lovely lady. We had a chat. I'd drunk about 4 cups of coffee by the time I got on the plane, and I was really chatty. So the poor lady didn't have any choice but to chat back. But anyway, it turned out she was a statistician, right? A proper professional statistician, Hock, who explained to me, it came up in conversation, that she's never been able to work out how APR actually works. So I told her the whole Bet Hacker story, and it made her laugh. And she taught me the phrase weaponized, and I'm going to put it in the chat, weaponized incompetence, which is a phrase I'm going to find myself using a hell of a lot. And I'm going to send her the recording of this, because I sort of said to her, I promise you, I'm going to make reference to weaponized incompetence during the course of today's meeting, because I told her all about this meeting. There we go. Does anybody have anything else they're itching to say before we wrap up? Fingers crossed tomorrow goes well, the scheme meeting. Fingers crossed the vote says no, the scheme of arrangement doesn't even have a chance to live. We've got the 3:30 meeting on Friday. Look at the Transparency Times to book yourself onto it. Onwards and upwards is basically the message of the day. Thanks so much to the Woodford 10 and the Isle of Man 2, and to all of you for being here and doing what you can to create this movement, this energy that's saying, stuff it, we're not going to let you bully us. That's basically what we're saying, folks. We're saying, stuff it, we're not going to let you bully us, and we're going to stand up and we're going to fight back to the best of our ability. I salute you all. Thank you very, very much indeed. Thank you. Well done, folks. Have a good evening. I'm going to go and get a pint of Guinness somewhere. Cheerio. Bye-bye. Bye-bye.